I think, coming from my own experience, I had two step parents. I had my dad and his wife, and then my mother and her husband. And, there's some crazy circumstances surrounding how I got here. But I do want to give the difference from a functional, somewhat normal upbringing with step parents and then a dysfunctional upbringing with step parents. The dysfunction, I'm going to say that first. My dad cheated on his wife with my mother, and that's how I got here. The most important part of that whole equation was the fact that I don't believe that my dad really took any type of accountability or responsibility. I don't know. But what I do know is that I had to spend summers at his house. And what I noticed, even at a young age, and I just didn't understand what it was, I was not even in double digits yet. But I did notice and felt the tension in the house. I felt like an outsider. My dad was 20 years older than my mother, and my half brother and sister were both old enough to be my parents. I had a niece around my age, which was my dad's granddaughter. And they were very close, and I would assume that they had been close all of her life until I came into the mix. Then you look at the fact that there's this animosity. My half brother and half sister, I don't believe they ever forgave my dad. And here I am, not knowing any of this, and my stepmother has to look at me every day. I never really got along with my stepmother, nor did I really like my stepmother. And also, my stepmother never really gave me a feeling of I would be safe around her. In fact, it was very, very rare that my dad would leave the house and I not go with him. He even told me years ago that, there was a time when he would see my stepmother looking at me and had such anger and disdain that he always figured that I can't just leave her. I can't leave him here with her because of a potential of what she could possibly do. After I got older, and this was like over the last 6-7 years, I began to look at that perspective from an adult. And I look at the pain and humiliation that probably caused my stepmother. And even though I didn't like my stepmother back when I was young, she could have been better to me, because I clearly had nothing to do with not just my dad, but what my mom did. I kind of thought that she could have handled the situation with me just personally. Hey, there's this little boy here, and yeah, I don't give a fuck about his father. His father probably ain't even apologized for it, but this little boy ain't had nothing to do with that. So let me just try to get to know him, try to make him feel safe. Like, he's not mine, but if he's here during the summer, I'm the mother figure that he's gonna see every day. She never really did any of that. There was a lot of pain and animosity in that house. On the flip side, my stepdad was a really, really good guy. When I was a little kid and I would have trouble with reading, it seemed like he would always come in the house with t-shirts or something on his hat, and always he would help me to learn how to read what was on his shirts and his hats and things of that nature. You know, he took me to football games and he treated me like a son. I had a stepbrother too. So, you know, it was my mom, my stepdad, me and my stepbrother. You know, if something got crazy in the house, there was an understanding between my mother and my stepfather. And if there was some type of discipline that needed to be carried out, then they spoke and they agreed on it, and whatever was to happen was to happen. I never felt like an outsider. My mom loved me. There was some in and outs with me and her as well, but it had nothing to do with like the severity of what was transpiring in my dad's house. But being a step parent, whether it's in a healthy or unhealthy atmosphere, is difficult. It's a thankless job. I love my dad. I couldn't wait to see him. My dad would take me on fishing trips and wrestling matches and things of that nature. And, you know, never one time did my mother say anything, you know, bad about him, talk bad about him when I was at home, you know, and I know that she had a lot of anger towards him, but she never let me see that. She never put my stepdad in a situation where I had to deal with, or my stepdad had to deal with my father directly. My mother was really, really wise about that. And, you know, when I see nowadays, and you go on social media and you have these interactions between the stepfather and the biological father, and the arguments that occur between the two of them for whatever reason, more times than not, you never see the mother in the mix, which I think is crazy as fuck. A stepfather should never be thrown in the middle of a past toxic relationship between his current woman and her ex-man. If the kids got to be picked up and dropped off, and it could be both ways, it could be the stepfather or it could be the father or the mother, but if kids need to be dropped off, that should happen between the two biological parents. You know, if money has to be exchanged because of child support or clothes or school supplies or something like that, no step parent should get in the middle of that, because that's not his child. It's almost like I see, whether it's a stepfather or a stepmother, one of the two biological parents figures a way to pit the step parents in between each other, which is fucked up for the child. But all in all, what I'm really trying to say is, when you get into these situations, and you may have children or you may not, but if you're dealing with somebody who does, you got to make sure that the biological parents are dealing with their child. And you can still love that child. I'm not saying don't love that. You're supposed to love that child. If you're the woman in the house, you're supposed to love them as your own, and vice versa for the man. But if there's a situation where the step parent is being put in a predicament to either defend or get into arguments and disagreements with the biological parent, you need to look at that shit straight.